And thank you for joining our webinar that we co-organized with the Arava Institute from Israel. This webinar is called Wind and Wings and is part of our Energy in Nature webinar series. And today we're gonna address the topic of bird protection around onshore wind infrastructure. So my name is Manon Quetstroey. I work at RGI. I will be the moderator today. I will give a short introduction of RGI in a few seconds. I work at RGI on onshore and offshore environmental projects. And my colleague Liam, who also works at RGI, will be the technical facilitator in the back. So if you have any technical issues, you can contact him via the chat. He is now gonna give a short housekeeping rule. So Liam, the floor is yours.
Yes, welcome everyone. I don't want to take your attention for too long. I'm sure you're all used to this, but just so that you're aware, we are recording this webinar. It will be put on YouTube and onto our website straight afterwards. So that you're aware of that. We would welcome if you put your camera on and also change your name on screen using the function that you see in this lovely picture of myself to rename with your organization as well. Please do remain muted throughout the duration of the webinar itself, but then of course you're welcome to unmute yourself to ask your questions later. There will be very brief Q&As between inputs for comprehension questions, but then of course the main discussion takes place at the end. I think that's all from me, so thanks and enjoy.
Thank you, Liam. So we're going to start. So today we're going to talk about a very important topic, which is bird protection around wind infrastructure. We all know that the deployment of renewables is absolutely necessary if we want to face the climate crisis, but it is also crucial to tackle the biodiversity crisis. And as we know, wind infrastructure can have a negative impact on biodiversity. But energy and nature do not need to have this kind of antagonist relationship. And it is possible to tackle the climate and the biodiversity crisis alongside. For example, one of the key to avoid the risk for bird population is a good pre-installation planning. This to make sure that the wind farm will not be installed in sensitive areas for birds. This can be done using, for example, sensitivity mapping tools, using up-to-date bird data, and by overlapping this map with potential areas for a wind farm, then you can see where to avoid sensitive areas for birds. But another potential action to reduce the risk are the mitigation measures once the farm is built. For example, stopping the machine to avoid bird collision, or use deterrent systems to dissuade individuals to come too close to the turbine, and then again, avoid mortality by collision. We'll start by explaining what the issue is and look deeper at solutions and good practices to avoid and reduce bird mortality. I want to walk you through the agenda. So as I mentioned, we co-organized this webinar with Arava Institute from Israel, and we want to open up the topic with the Israeli case study as a striking example of the challenge of bird protection around onshore wind farms. So why the Israeli case study? Because it represents the perfect example of the potential conflict between nature and the renewables while moving away from fossil fuel-based economy. We'll have three speakers from Israel: Dr. Tareq Abu Hamed, who is the CEO of Arava Institute. Then we'll go to Dr. Yoav Perlman, who is the director of BirdLife Israel. And last, Dr. Noam Leader, who is the head of the ecology department from the Israel Nature and Park Authority. We'll have a short Q&A for comprehensive question before we hear from Iván Ramírez, who is the head of Avian Species Team at the UN Convention on Migratory Species, CMS. and he will talk about the importance of good planning to inform the siting of new wind farms. For our last presentations, we'll go to France, where Maria Tobon, a project manager at MSH-Sud, and Thierry Chambert, who is the postdoctoral researcher at the CEFE-CNRS, will present the fantastic collaborative and multi-stakeholder research project called MAPE. Finally, we'll have 3 reactions from key stakeholders from the wind industry and from the NGO. To finish, we'll have a bit more than 30 minutes for questions and discussion, and you will have enough time to ask all your questions. So for those who don't know who we are, who is RGI? We are an NGO based in Berlin, and we define ourselves as a unique collaboration of environmental NGOs and TSOs, which is transmission system operators, from across Europe. And together, we promote fair, transparent, sustainable grid development to enable the growth of renewables in order to achieve the full decarbonization in line with the Paris Agreement. So what does that mean exactly? It means that we bring those actors all together at the same table to agree on positions, to work on projects together, to push forward the energy transition in a way that works for nature, the climate, and the people. Regarding environmental protection, we work on 3 main topics: vegetation management, multifunctionality of energy infrastructure, and finally, the topic that is relevant for today, bird protection around energy infrastructure. You might be wondering why we're now talking about wind farms and not the grid, but by actively working for years with what we call a wide energy transition ecosystems of actors, which means NGO, TSOs, but also the wind industry, researchers, the authorities, the governments, etc. Our activities go beyond the grid, as we know that all energy infrastructure can potentially have an impact on nature. So this is all for my side. I'm gonna pass the word to Jozsef Kadar, who's gonna give an introduction about the Arava Institute. Jozsef, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Manon. And first of all, I would like to say thank you for Manon and Liam again to organizing with us this amazing webinar. Thank you so much. So those who doesn't know who or what is Arava Institute, it's a education and interdisciplinary research center. We are working through energy, water, food research, and it's very important. This is a cross-border research institute. We're working with Palestinians, Jordanians, researchers all around the region. We are located in Kibbutz Torah, South Israel, and we were established in 1996, and since the founding in 1966, the Arava Institute has hosted more than 800 graduate and undergraduate students of various nationalities, including Israeli Jewish, Israeli Arabs, Palestinians, Jordanian, Tunisian, Moroccan, European, and American students. And now, the short introduction. After our institute, I would like to ask Dr. Tareq Abu Hamed to start his presentation.
Thank you, Joseph. I also would like to thank the Renewables Grid Initiative for this partnership on such an important topic, and actually the time that we live in now after COP27 in Egypt, and the importance of the transition from fossil fuels into renewable energies to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions becomes much more important than any time. And as Joseph said, the Arava Institute is the leading environmental organization, academic and research organization in the region that tries to advance cross-border environmental cooperation in the Middle East, regardless the conflict that we have. Wind energy is an important topic not only for Israel but the whole region that we live in. And when we combine it with the challenges when it comes to birds, Jordan also faces the same challenge. The Palestinians also facing the same challenge, because the region that we live in is a really tiny region. So I'll share my slides, and I would like to start with this slide that shows the wind energy capacity in the world, and we all see that the increase in the wind energy installation is significant. Just last year, 102 gigawatts were installed, and the world now reached more than 900 gigawatts installed capacity. So the sector is growing very fast. And when we look at Israel, the Israeli case, we see that Israel still relies mainly on fossil fuels, natural gas and coal for electricity production, and oil for transportation. And if we look to the electricity sector in Israel, we see that a tiny portion of the electricity is generated from renewables, not mainly wind, but mainly from solar photovoltaics and solar thermal. So the country is still relying on fossil fuels also for the electricity production. I'm saying this with the saying, unfortunately, we're a country with plenty of solar radiation, but still the renewable electricity in the country is very low. And when we look into renewable energies in the electricity production sector in Israel, we see that only 250 gigawatt hours produced from wind energy from few wind farms in Israel. Israel has a potential for wind energy in the north and also in the south, but it's very important to mention and to remember that the south and north parts of Israel is the route for the bird migration from Africa to Europe and from Europe to Africa. The impact, the environmental impact, just an introductory information on the impact of wind energy, the environmental impact. We know that the major issue is the disturbance of birds. What's also very important to remember that fossil fuels, our buildings, our cars, even cats, they cause bird mortality is much more than the wind turbines, but this is not an excuse for not considering such an important issue. And the numbers that you see in the third figure here are actually numbers that were used by one of the famous researchers in the world, Professor Benjamin Sovacool. He's from the UK, and he does a lot of research on social aspects and environmental aspects of energy resources. Birds are not only the habitats that are impacted by wind energy, also the marine system is also impacted by wind. And quickly, the factors that impact the birds in wind turbines, it's the flashlights that actually attract the birds into the turbines, the weather conditions. When you have cloudy weather, the birds tend to fly on lower altitudes, and that increases the danger of hitting the turbines. The turbine design is also a very important factor for birds. Old and small wind turbines, they usually have small blades, and the rotation of the blades are very high. And the small turbines also attract birds to nest on these wind turbines, and that increases the chances of collision between the birds and the wind turbines. And when we look into the local climate impact, many researchers around the world shows that show that the impact is really minimal on the local weather. And the land use impact of wind turbines, when we compare it with the fossil fuel or other renewable energy sources, we know that wind turbines use much less land compared to other renewable energy resources. I'm looking forward to hear from the experts on birds and wind turbines in this webinar. And again, it's this study or this webinar is not only important for Israel, but also for the neighboring countries that we work with in the region, for example, Jordan and the Palestinian Authority. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tareq. That was super interesting. I'm going to pass the floor now to Dr. Yoav Perlman. If you want to share your screen, please go ahead. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Can you see it well?
Yes, perfect. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks for the introduction. My name is Yoav Perlman. I'm the director of BirdLife Israel, which is a part of the Society for Protection of Nature in Israel, which is the largest conservation NGO in Israel. I will talk about setting the scene. I'll talk about the issues, the conflicts, and maybe later on we'll talk about solutions, but I will present what I know and the data I have about the risks that birds are facing by wind infrastructure in Israel. I think that the background is known to everyone. We just finished a COP, successful or unsuccessful, but it still happened, and everyone's now talking about nature-based solutions and how we should solve the climate crisis with nature, not against nature. This branding of nature-based solutions, but what does it mean? It's still some big questions, but there are some very practical implications of that. When we're talking about Israel, I listened to what Tareq said about Israel and about our contribution to biodiversity and to emissions. I think it's really, really important to understand the context and the scales. Israel's global contribution to emissions is, according to the data I have, is something like 0.15 of the global emissions. However, biodiversity is a bit more complicated to quantify, but at least for some bird species, 100% of the world population passes through Israel on migration. I just wanted to correct Tareq. It's not only in the north and south. All of Israel is one big global migration highway for birds, so all over Israel. Israel's contribution to biodiversity, at least from my point of view, is far, far greater than what we can do to reduce emissions. That's one important context. Just as a reminder, Israel lies on one of the two most important bird migration flyways. This is not only from nice posters, hand-drawn, but also from actual data. The map you see on the right is tracks of lesser spotted eagles. Lesser spotted eagles, about 95% of the global population passes through Israel in a short period of about 2 weeks. So Israel is super important for some species like this. But overall, Israel is one huge bird migration highway. It's a bottleneck because of its geographic location, because of the seas from both sides. That means like in a big, busy motorway during peak rush hour, Israel is busy almost year-round with bird migration everywhere, all over the country, almost all year. In addition, it's not only the migratory birds. We have our own breeding avifauna of native species breeding here. Some are threatened, like these breeding birds of prey on the left here. They're all threatened and are under risk from collisions. Currently, as you may know, there are not many onshore wind projects in Israel. There are few in the north that have already been set, and there's another one that's still in the planning corridors, but it will probably be set in the south, and that's all at the moment. There is mortality monitoring, so the mortality caused directly by these wind turbines is being monitored. Israel Nature and Parks Authority are in charge of this monitoring. I guess the speaker after me, Noam Leader, will talk more about that. Dogs are used to find the traces of birds killed by the wind turbines, and different models are used to estimate the actual number of birds that are killed. By the way, it's not only birds. There's strong impact on bats as well. So birds and bats are found, and then different models are used to estimate the mortality rates. Some of the data that I have, I assume that Noam will present it as well. So the Sirin Gilboa farms operated by AFCON. The blades are 44 meters tall. Very, very serious mortality, birds of prey, storks, many other birds, bats, a lot of bats as well. There were some very, very dramatic cases there where there were very attractive crops grown by farmers just under the turbines, and they killed a lot of birds. These farms don't have any mitigation systems or early warning systems, nothing at all. And they kill large numbers and a broad range of species, different groups. This is from one estimate that was done in 6 months. Big numbers, big diversity of species, and a lot of bats as well. This is an article that was published in the media that's talking about the rates that are killed by these projects are higher than what's so regular in other parts of the world, much, much higher. And the Golan Heights, Emek HaBacha, founded in 2020, started operating in 2022, higher turbines, 85 meters. They kill a lot of birds as well, especially short-toed eagles, other raptors and storks. It's not been operating long, but the data up till now has been very, very scary. In Tel Fares, also in the Golan Heights, there's a project that the turbines have already been set up, but they've been given a year to test their early warning system. We, BirdLife Israel, did a project for Israel Nature Parks Authority just a couple of months ago to try and estimate how they operate to locate sensitive species approaching the turbines and stop the turbines, and they did. The results were quite miserable, I must say. And yeah, there's a system that gives these wind project energies permits to kill. So there are sort of limits of different species. What is the allowed number of individuals allowed to kill by turbine per year? So some of our rare threatened breeding species like the Riergen griffin, an Egyptian vulture, and Bonelli's eagle, 0. Okay, so they're not allowed to kill any those projects. But what happens if they do? That's not very clear. But other species like short-toed eagle, this number 0.1 doesn't look much, but in practice, what happens in a few years in the Golan Heights when these two farms start to operate in Tel Fares and Emek HaBacha? In a few years, I'm afraid that all the short-toed eagles breeding in the Golan Heights and long-necked buzzards will become extirpated. They will just be all killed. And it's really, really important to zoom out again. I think that if we looked at Earth from outer space and could choose the worst place to put wind or onshore wind projects, Israel would be one place, and in the Straits in Central America would be the second place. Seriously, the worst places in the world from the perspective of bird collisions. And it's really important to...
Sorry, you have to cut you. You just have 1 minute left.
Okay, I'll be quick. It's
Thank
really
you.
important to talk about the potential impact at population level for species like the Levant sparrowhawk, that 100% of the world population passes through Israel, sometimes in large flocks. Think of a mortality, so 50,000 left in the world. Think of one large mortality event. They fly in very, very tight flocks. It could have a serious impact on population levels. I think Israel is a case study that we really need to think out of the box on how we plan our renewable energies and how we plan our policies. The threats to biodiversity are proven. They're already happening, and we know what they're doing, and we can only be fearful of what will happen if we further develop onshores. It's important to reduce emissions, but there are alternatives to do that. Other renewable energy methods, especially solar PV on roofs. That's maybe the safest way to move forward, solar PV on roofs, but certainly no more new onshore and offshore plans should be developed. And those that are already existing need to be heavily monitored, mitigated, and restricted. And again, I go back to Israel's contribution. I think that Israel's contribution to the fight against climate change should be on nature-based solutions, restoration and protection. That's really what we should be investing rather than more wind turbines. I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yoav. Indeed, the message was clear, I think. I'm going to pass the floor now to Dr. Noam Leader, please, if you want to go ahead, share your slides. Thank you.
I don't know, I can't find it. Just a second. Okay. Can you see it now?
It's still charging, but I guess it's going to come any seconds. Now we see your screen, but it's not in presenter mode.
Okay. Okay, now there's a small delay. Can you see it now?
No, it's still the.
Can you see in presenter mode?
It's still not in presenter mode, unfortunately.
So let me stop sharing again, and I will try to from the beginning. I don't know why this
No,
happened.
first change to presenter mode and then start sharing.
Really? Okay. So still you don't see it in presenter mode?
No, it's still.
Okay,
it's still
so we're used to working with Zoom and not with Teams, so I'm less familiar. Okay, let's activate the Zoom right now.
Maybe you can share your entire screen rather than one window, and then we will see them. I don't know if that makes it easier.
Last time, let's try and see. Can you see it right now? No, okay, so I'll have to move to a different. You're right. I'll have to move to this. Okay.
Now we can see your slides. It's a bit zoomed in. If you can just zoom out a little bit, and then we.
Okay, so sorry about that. I don't know why it's behaving like this.
Perfect. Now
okay.
we can see them.
Can you see it now? Okay. So what I'll try to. So hi, my name is Noam Leader. I'm the head of the Ecology Department at the Israel Nature and Parks Authority. What I will try to show in the very short time I have is to show you the Israeli plan on how to reduce the impact of wind energy on birds and on bats in Israel. So very quickly, background. So the INPA is a government authority. We're in charge of protection of nature, heritage, and landscapes. All wildlife, all vertebrate wildlife is protected by law in Israel. So anything that has to do with mortality from collisions is something we have to regulate. We are professional advisors to the Ministry of Environmental Protection in working with the National Planning Commission. So the topic at hand is that Israel is committed under the Paris Agreement to change to renewable energy sources, and the allocation for wind energy it was at the time was 750 megawatts. And at the end of 2015, the National Planning Commission appointed a professional team to build an outline for design solutions to minimize harm to winged vertebrates, from birds and bats, from wind energy, because we actually didn't know what to do. This is something new. We didn't have any wind turbines in Israel. We know that we're sitting on one of the major migration routes. So this team that was led by Environmental Protection Agency, together with INPA and together with SPNI, which Yoav Perlman is now the head of the bird department, and together with consultants on behalf of the wind sector developers, we formalized the plan. And basically what we did is we created a set of tools and an outline how to use them based on scientific knowledge at the time, and more importantly, on being very, very transparent. So we had to explain everything we did. We had to do it based on knowledge. And so we created a series of tools like sensitivity maps, mortality thresholds, things that I will talk in this talk. Each one of these tools has a specific purpose, specific use, so who should use it and when. And of course, we took this knowledge from many countries that had already experienced this. One of the first tools we made was a sensitivity map. You can see here our sensitivity map for bats and birds. It's actually a grid map, but it's now what you can see, it's superimposed on landscape units. And if you can see in the gray, these are areas in Israel where there's wind above 5.1, above 5 meters per second. So most of Israel is actually not suitable for wind turbines. But I won't talk about the sensitivity map because most of the sightings were already done before we created the sensitivity map. And by the way, if you look at BirdLife sensitivity mapping of Israel, you see that all Israel is super high sensitivity. Other tools we created is we looked at how to assess surveys. So you do a survey before you set up the wind farm. You have many birds are coming through that area. How do you know how many birds you are perhaps going to kill due to collision? So there are all kinds of models. We chose one, and the idea is that the planning commissions could actually judge any plan after a survey by using this collision risk model, assuming that it has some kind of threshold to compare to. So if, for example, the number is 150, you have to know where your upper limit is, which brings us to the biggest question of when is it too much and where do you draw the line? So when you think of threshold values for significant harm to birds or bats, you have to think of that determining a threshold value means determining the maximum number of individuals that may be harmed as part of the operation of wind farms, because there will be mortality, and which us as regulators can allow without this causing significant harm to populations of these species. So, excuse me, I'll have to just scoot over this picture, delete it. And this threshold value plays a role in the planning phase. So planning commission sees the survey, sees the model, and it shows that expected mortality will be more or less than the plan to decide go no-go for such a project. And the threshold value also has an important role in the operational phase in order to determine whether this wind farm has deviated from what we hope will be a very low amount of mortality, and you need to do something about it. So to establish a threshold, actually you need two things. You first need to know some kind of statistical basis on the number of expected birds or bats that will be injured by wind turbines, and then you need to decide what kind of what is the degree of caution that you want to be around this number. This is basically the precautionary principle. So what we did is we looked at data from about 121 wind turbine projects in North America and Europe. It was available at that time in 2016. And what we think very interesting, if you take all the wind turbines that I talked about, 121, and you lay them in this graph from the lowest number of collisions per turbine per year until the highest, you will see something. You'll see that about 50% of the wind farms are not creating such a big problem. It's about 2.4, 2.3 birds or bats per year, and this is very good. And this is what is expected if Israel is like other nations. However, if you look at the right side of the graph, and you can see that 10% of these farms are creating a massive amount of mortality. And from the data that we had, most of it comes from Spain. Spain, a Mediterranean country, also a country of migration, very, very similar to Israel. And if you look at the square that's beside it, you can see that 6 different farms could eventually cause the death of more than 130,000 birds during the 20 years of expected operations of wind turbines. And this is very, very bad. And this is something, of course, we didn't want to reach. And in Spain, there is documented a lot of mortality, for example, great bustards. And so we thought that we want to escape this this 10%, and we said, well, we have to draw the line somewhere. So we looked at where the graph starts to rapidly increase. We said, well, we'll draw a line here. This is the maximum we can allow. So we use the 85% percentile to say that, well, we can't allow more than 15 birds. Same thing we did with bats. And so to sacrifice is sacrificing in full agreement of the Paris Agreement, because on the first page of the agreement, it says, noting the importance of ensuring the integrity of all ecosystems and the protection of biodiversity when taking action to address climate change. So when we draw this line here, nobody can actually say, well, we just care about the birds and we don't see the big picture. And so this transformed into thresholds in which we declaratively, we said, okay, using data from the world, we can say that we can't allow more than 14 birds per turbine or 10 bats per turbine per year. Of course, this doesn't work when you look at birds and bats of concern. So we need a stricter threshold that applies the precautionary principle for species that are either soaring migratory bird species or birds that are in the IUCN Red List or the Israeli Red List or in any of the annexes of all these UN conventions for conservation of migratory species in which Israel is a signatory to. And so these thresholds are much smaller. These would be 0.2 soaring birds per turbine. And also, this is not enough because for some species, brink of extinction, like the griffin vulture or the Egyptian vulture, we need something which is more strict. And so using population viability analysis models, we found that this needs to be zero mortality. So in a place where there is a risk for a griffin vulture or a golden eagle, there shouldn't be any wind turbines. Now, these thresholds, they look very, and this is the way how to kill any projects. We didn't invent it. Countries like Canada and the United States and our neighbors, Jordan and Egypt, are applying such principles. As we started to collect mortality data in wind turbines that have started to work, we suddenly found a lot of mortality. And first of all, we wrote guidelines. We now demand mandatory use of trained dogs and how to do the calculations. But we started to find large-scale mortality of many bird and bat species, which were recorded in the Gilboa and Syrian. I have a small video in which shows one of these mortality events, but I don't have time. But what this meant is that we had to have some kind of control during the activation phase. So we determined as one of our tools that each developer needs to have a detailed plan to minimize collisions during operation. And this is a condition of the permit, of the take permit that he gets from the INPA. And these threshold values should be used to examine the extent of actual mortality based on this regular monitoring. And in the event of exceeding these threshold values, a predetermined preparedness plan will be implemented in stages. And this includes increased monitoring and measures to minimize damage, and could even lead to temporary permanent shutdown of turbines that cause significant damage to winged animals.
I'm sorry to cut you, Yoav. This is very interesting. You have 2 minutes left.
Okay, excellent, very good. Okay,
Thank you.
Now when you talk of mitigation, mitigation is a very nice word. Now try to make it happen. First of all, you have to think of all the different birds and bird groups. You have birds that are migratory, birds that are resident. You have birds that fly at night. You have birds that are diurnal. You have bats, and you have soaring birds. You have all kinds of different animals that you need to have different types of mitigation for them. So, for example, for bats, of course, you would have to cease the idle activity of turbines at night. So if they're just running or just moving and not creating energy at slow winds, they're just killing bats. And so there are ways to do this. And if you see more of turbines doesn't start at, let's say, 3 meters per second, it starts at 5. And you can actually have a smart regime in which you have some kind of algorithm which detects bat behavior around the nacelle, wind speed, and different parameters of temperatures, and you can have a very smart program that will stop the turbines in whenever the correct conditions for bat foraging are on. And this could lead to up to 80% decrease in mortality of bats. And if you do it correctly, it will not necessarily have to involve a deep cut in the energy in the productivity of the farm. Tareq mentioned Jordan. In Jordan, they did a brilliant job. This was supported by the World Bank. They did with the highest environmental standards, and they actually used the same tools we did. And they have a shutdown on demand operating regime, the same in Egypt, where they have huge wind farms, where they have huge stork migrations. Hundreds of thousands are coming every spring. There they use shutdown on demand combined with radar. And apparently it works. This is data we got from our colleague in Egypt, and they have less mortality. And this is now trying to be implemented. This is where I'm ending, by the Genesis wind farm in the Golan Heights. There we have a problem with griffin vultures. We're afraid of mortality, but the developers have put in a system with radar and observers, as Yoav mentioned. They're now trying the system a year before the turbines start. We're monitoring closely how successful they are. I have to admit we're worried, but everybody's worried. And because the situation is it's not for migration. You have a constant local population of griffin vultures and of Egyptian vultures, and it's very hard to defend them from not coming into the turbines. So just to close my my talk, I will just tell you that these the tools that we created were presented in many professional forums, CMS, for example, also with wind industry developers, also with many lawyers on the way, and parliament officials. It was adopted by the Ministry of Environment, and finally the recommendations were accepted by the National Planning Commission and were published, although still a draft, but as regulations in Plan 41, which deals with green energy. And we're slowly starting to see implementation in new wind farm planning, although we still have to take into consideration what about the old farms. Now, just to close, from at least what we know, there are probably no other tools unless you want to ignore one of the issues. Either ignore wind turbines and wind energy, or you ignore biodiversity. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Tareq, Yoav, and Noam. This was absolutely amazing, and I think it really set the scene for the Israeli case and the challenge that Israel is facing regarding renewables and the protection of migratory birds. We have 1 minute for a comprehensive question. I saw one question from Thierry. If you want to open your microphone and ask your questions, please do so.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, actually asked 2 questions which are related. Talking about the mortality thresholds, first of all, if you define a threshold like number of mortality per turbine, how do you deal with the issue of cumulative effects as you start having more and more wind turbine in the same area? So that's my first question. Second question is, don't you think that those mortality thresholds should be based on conservation objective and PVA or population modeling, rather than using the quantiles of distribution of wind energy collision around the world, as you showed us?
Okay, so the first question is based on Israel's number of megawatts to be produced by wind energy. So if you have a constant amount, you say 750 megawatts, let's say, 2 megawatts per turbine at the time, you know how many turbines you have. Once you start exceeding this limit, then it's a different ballgame. Okay, so first of all, they were introduced as, if it's a closed field. Now you're right, because now what's happening is that most of the wind farms are suddenly now when they go on height. So it's not the whole playing field of all Israel. It's now in a much smaller place, and now you have a lot. And so now, but yeah, there are some problems now regarding the PVA. Okay, you're right. We have 33 species of bats in Israel. How many species do you think anybody in the world has enough information to put the correct values in a population viability model to know exactly what to do? And so this is a problem. When you don't have the correct data, then garbage in, garbage out. You don't get a good model. I saw several models. Some developers tried to use all kinds of numbers. No relation to any truth. So you have to see what you have. And what you have in your hand is the IUCN Red data book. You have data from CMS. You have all kinds of data you need to use. And we're not far from the statistics. It doesn't really matter what the collisions in the world are, but when you start to look at specific groups like raptors, and you see the more current statistics, you're in the same ballpark. Okay, so when you don't have good data, you can't use PVA. Okay, everybody wants to use. We could only find 10 species we could do PVA on them. All the rest, not relevant. So you need to find something else.
Okay, yeah, I think there is, I understand what you're saying about the issue about data you throw in PVA, but in some cases, I think if you can still have some range of value that are relevant using expert elicitation or so, sometimes it might still be worth doing a PVA, even though some numbers are approximated. And like for vital rates, usually you can use like a closed species. That's what we did in some of our stuff. So anyway, I hear your point. I think I wouldn't throw PVA right out of the window, just saying because we don't have data. There's a cost benefits here between just putting threshold kind of in a very arbitrary way versus trying
they're not. I'm sorry. They're not.
Yeah.
The 14
I'm
and
sorry,
10
I have
are
to cut you.
Okay?
No, I'm sorry, I have to cut you. Can we keep this for the discussion afterwards?
Sure.
Because we'll have, this was really interesting and a very good questions, Thierry. We'll go back to that in the discussion afterwards. So I'd like now to pass the floor to Iván Ramírez, who will talk about the importance of good pre-installation planning as a first step to avoid bird collision. And he also is he's member of the Energy Task Force, and he works at CMS, and he's also gonna present the work that they're doing. So Iván, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I feel sorry that I have to cut this interesting debate. So apologies in advance. And also I would like to say congratulations to the previous speakers, and especially to Mr. Noam Leader, because I really liked the presentation. And I think basically, well, you covered many of the points that I was going to make. So I feel that more relaxed now for the things that I have to say. But anyway, I will go. So thanks for inviting us to this important webinar. As I work in the Convention on Migratory Species, and the idea is to go quickly through the experience that we are having in the Energy Task Force, but also to give an overview of the guidance that we have produced, and also some of the platforms that we are using, or some of the platforms that our implementing partners are using to prevent the unsustainable deployment of wind farms or renewable energy around the globe. So very quickly, in terms of the introduction, this is what I will cover, a bit about the CMS task force and also the importance of flyways. Let's not forget why we are here. We are talking about bird conservation. And then the importance of best practice guidance and planning, and a couple of examples, as I said, from our implementing partner, BirdLife International. So very quickly about the CMS, I hope that it's familiar to all of you, and it's already been mentioned, so I don't think I have to go into a lot of detail, but we are the only UN treaty that focuses exclusively on the conservation of migratory species. And I always like to say, you know, for those who maybe are not too clear, for the CMS, a migratory species is any species that crosses political boundaries. Of course, you know, as already mentioned, in the case of Israel and the Middle East, this is a fantastic hotspot for migration, and therefore a priority in terms of bird conservation. But nevertheless, the CMS treaty, currently covering 133 parties, 132 countries plus the European Union, also has other daughter agreements, as we call it, that are already mentioned here and that are relevant. That would be the Africa-Eurasian Waterbird Agreement, but also the Raptors MOU and Eurobats. Let's not forget about bats, because they are one of the key species when we are talking about wind farms. Very quickly about the composition of the Energy Task Force. You've got there the logo, and quickly who we are in the Energy Task Force, of which, for example, RGI is one of our members, but we have national governments. Of course, that's our primary target, to make sure that governments do hear more about specific guidance and best practice, but also other multilateral environmental agreements, industry, multilateral organizations such as the African Union or the East Asian Australasian Flyway Partnership, NGOs for sure, BirdLife International, BTO and others. Many of the BirdLife partners are actually observers as well. RGI, as I mentioned. Also, we have the World Bank and many of the development and investment banks, which I would say are playing a crucial role in the way that we work. And I want to have this slide because, as I said before, it's important to focus on why we are having these kind of meetings. This is because, A, we believe that flyways are probably a paradigmatic example of, in this case, an animal movement or a bird movement that really can give us an overview about how to cooperate across borders. They really can foster international cooperation, and at the same time, they demand strategic planning and the study of cumulative impact assessments. We are talking about millions of birds crossing borders, and you have there a diagram showing you some of the key flyways. But please do not forget that migratory birds are threatened. I mean, if we just take an example of the Afro-Palearctic migrant species, we do know that 40% of them are exhibiting negative population trends. This is why we need to do something about them, and this is why we need to do it now. And at the same time, to meet, of course, the Paris climate agreements, which are fundamental, as we just saw in the last COP. And so I would like to show you some of the examples of the work that we are doing, including myths and solutions. So I think that we have been able over the years to destroy some of the myths that we had in the past. For example, I think that it's really important to understand the movement patterns before the construction phase. This has already been said, but this is one of the key learning areas for the ETF. We need the data before construction is happening to make sure that we can inform the process. Governments do need the data. It is false to believe that governments can go ahead without the data. Most of the parties that work with us, I would say all of them, really are looking forward to receiving more and more information about biodiversity in time before they decide on a particular infrastructure. NGO and academia can provide data. I mean, when the resources are deployed to them, when they have enough time to gather the data, definitely this data is available and can be provided to the key stakeholders. And at the same time, international funding institutions, World Bank and the others, are really eager to use this data. And they want it as soon as possible, really, so they can inform and they can decide on whether or not particular funding can be provided to a specific party, to a specific government, etc. So what are the key problems? So what is missing from our experience? Well, I would say basically we need to make sure that strategic environmental assessments does take place, and it takes place, at government level and at country level as soon as possible. We need to make sure that we trust all the different stakeholders. That is, trying to remove any kind of stereotypes and misconceptions about the work that NGOs do, the work that academia does, the work that governments do, because we have found in several regions that sometimes, a lack of trust really blocked a successful, cooperation. We need to provide time to all the stakeholders. Time, we see it constantly, that is one of the limiting factors, from the funding mechanisms to the NGOs to the governments themselves. Sometimes they tell to have more information before we decide, but actually the reality is that we had maybe, 20 days to make a decision, 60 days in the best case scenario to gather the data, and this is not enough for us. So we need to make sure that we have more time given to stakeholders. We've also seen that access to data is really a limiting factor. We do have a lot of experience, with many partners saying that they do have data, but then they are unable to share it because of data ownership. Or on the other hand, we have institutions, European Union, governments, World Bank saying, we know that this particular research was taking place, but we weren't able to access that in time. So this is really a barrier. And so sharing the guidance and making sure that this information is available is vital at all levels. And of course, we do think that we need to provide more capacity building. We have identified a lot of needs at all levels. Again, this is going from governments to NGOs to an extent, but it is true that it is really, really appreciated whenever we are able to provide capacity building, specific webinars, tailor events for governments and for also institutions like, as I said, development banks. So really quickly on the solutions that we are offering, and I will go quickly, as I said, because the easiest, I would say, is you can all Google, the CMS task force, the energy task force. And as always, I always say, the website may not be the most user-friendly website. We are working on this, but the truth is that there is a lot of information there and a lot of supporting guidance that you can really benefit from. And, what we basically want to make sure is that this is a multi-stakeholder platform. It's free, it's of course no fee to become a member of the ETF, and we really focus on the needs of our partners. That means that we offer a repository of information, a lot of guidance, a lot of best practice, a lot of country-to-country guidance that we can also focus on. We have a program of work that also identifies what are the next big things that we need to focus on. I mean, it's been mentioned here, the role of solar power and photovoltaic in Israel. Well, this has been identified as one of the key areas of further work for the ETF, because this is a huge problem, or let's say a huge challenge. I don't want to put it in negative. For example, mining of components for electric vehicles is a big problem in some parts of the world, especially in Latin America, and we're working on it. Floating wind farms are also becoming increasingly a hot topic, and we need to provide more guidance on that. And also, let's make sure that we address sub-regional needs, because the one size fits all, it's not really true. I mean, you already were mentioning here what happens in Israel, where, you have a fantastic hotspot for migration, and, you can compare pairs to pairs. So, I mean, definitely there are other countries, and they've been mentioned here, where migration bottlenecks are vital, but we cannot tailor the same solutions everywhere. It's important that we know where are the species. It's important that we understand the habitat, the land use, the challenges, the energy options that every country has before we tailor the solutions. So I will just go quickly on some of the examples of our work, but as I said, this is all available on the website. There is at the moment more than 30 guidance documents available, and they cover pretty much everything from the sustainable deployment of energy to the impacts to migratory species to grids. I know that grids are not a topic of this webinar today, but of course this is linked and it's important that it's covered. We work with parties to improve the deployment of tools that really can prevent the problems that I indicated before, precisely, having the information well in advance and making sure that governments, academia, investors have the information well before, and that's basically tools like MSB, Migratory Israel, or AviStep. And we are, for example, now creating a database of national experts. One of the things that governments told us is that they sometimes have a lot of difficulties trying to know who are the best people to contact when they have a future deployment of a wind farm, for example. So we're working on a database so it is easily accessible to everybody to know who are the key consultants, who are the key NGOs working on this, who are the key academia, who are the key investors per country, so they can access, and we hope that we can publish this in the next months. I mean, hopefully before the end of this year, actually. And the other thing that we are really doing, and that was the focus this year, was really to improve the engagement with international finance mechanisms. There was a lot of need from their side to improve the cooperation, and we are now finishing this engagement strategy that basically lays out a program of work. So we make sure that whenever we are producing guidance, they know it. Whenever they are producing guidance, we're passing that to the countries, and everybody is on top. Just to give you an example, a typical scenario would be a country that is increasing their grid, the power line grid, but they are basically designing wrongly the poles, and this is causing a massive mortality of migratory birds. Simply by sharing the information in advance, we would avoid this, and this we have seen already in so many countries, especially in the sub-Saharan Africa. And of course, we are tailoring specific workshops. We are really making sure that whenever there is a need, we tailor a workshop, such as the one that we are having today, organized by RTI. I was asked to cover quickly the guidelines on sustainable deployment, but I think most of the impacts have already been mentioned here, so I will go quickly here, because I think we've talked about the impacts to migratory species, habitat loss, disturbance, mortality, collision or electrocution, and definitely, worsened health conditions while migratory species are passing by. That means, flight dispersal, stress levels, and lower breeding success in some cases. This guidance that it's available on our website, gives recommendations. Again, they've been already mentioned here, so I don't think I need to cover them with a lot of detail. But again, really, really important to have national strategic environmental assessments done at country level, or at least, in really large landscapes approach. So governments have got the information well in advance, and this is about sensitivity mapping, high risk areas. I mean, I've already seen it in the presentation previous to mine. So I think, good examples were already mentioned here, but there are examples also in other regions. We are seeing an increase on the need on the use of predictive models, sensitivity mapping, and IT tools, such as the ones that I will be showing now. And definitely, of course, let's do not forget about EIAs at site level. Despite of having the strategic approach, we do still need good quality EIAs, environmental assessments done at site level before the final decision takes place. There are also details like, wind farm configuration, where you need to make sure that if you are addressing this at a hotspot of migration, like a bottleneck, simple decisions such as putting the wind farms parallel to the migration corridors is essential to avoid, high mortalities. And of course, and again, it's been mentioned, technical solutions such as SAT on demand or monitoring of the biodiversity is vital if at the end the wind farm has taken place. So I know that I have only 2 minutes left, but I think that I can cover this. This is really just about some of the examples of planning tools that in this particular case, implementing partners of the ETF are deploying. So very quickly, this one I think has already been mentioned, power line guidance, the SAT on demand, the assessment on impact on power grids, and this is all available in the website. This has been produced by UNDP funded through BirdLife. So I will just focus on two of the web tools that are probably more relevant to your region. One is MSB, or the Soaring Bird Sensitivity Mapping Tool. This is a free-to-use website developed by BirdLife International. I didn't mention it before, but the way that CMS works is that we sponsor implementing partners. So we are gathering the money that we get through governments or other funders, and then we hire an implementing partner. In this case, is BirdLife International. So this tool really gives you a really nice overview of the relevance for habitats, for species, and then the suitability models for wind farms or power lines, and already gives you a snapshot of the situation at a regional level. So I would really encourage everybody to use it and to support it. And the next step, let's say, or the newer tool that BirdLife is promoting and that we are promoting through the ATF is AviStep. At the moment, it's only available in those 4 countries, but I do know that this is about to expand to other countries. This is the state-of-the-art, let's say, approach to sensitivity mapping and spatial planning, and I would really encourage you to go. We don't have now time to go through it. But again, it offers you a fantastic overview because it includes already the sensitivity mapping tools such as, suitability for wind deployment or risks to collision to birds. At that really, really small scale. So as I said, not available now for this part of the world, but definitely we hope and we are fundraising so we can sponsor BirdLife to increase this in other parts of the world. So that's it from my side. I think, as I said, most of the details have been provided in previous talks, but I think, it's important to highlight that whenever there is the willingness to cooperate and to share expertise and to talk, we are able to find solutions. So thank you very much. This is the website, and really happy to provide more details if needed. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Iván. That was a fantastic presentation to look into the work that you've done with the CMS and with the Energy Task Force. We shared the link in the chat to the both website, the Energy Task Force and the CMS. So Great. Please feel free to go through. We won't have, unfortunately, I'm a bit concerned about time. We won't have time for comprehensive questions right now. I saw questions in the chat, but please keep them for the discussion afterwards. Yeah, we will have time to go through them. Thank you. You mentioned, Iván, something interesting, which is the trust across stakeholders, and we need to have more engagement with the stakeholders and have enough time to discuss with them and understand their priority and to work together. This is super interesting, and this is also the work that we are trying to do at RGI. So yeah. And speaking about that, we're going to go to our next presentation, which is about the MAPE project, which is a multi-stakeholder and collaborative research project. And they're also going to present the tool that they have developed through the project. So I'm going to pass the floor to Maria Tobon first, who will present the project.
Yeah, thank you.
The floor is yours.
So can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see it. It's not in presentation mode, but yes, now we can see it. Okay. Yes, thank you.
So thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you very much also to the other speakers that for the interesting presentations. So we are going to present you the collaborative research program that is called MAPE, which stands for Reduction of Bird Mortality in Operating Wind Farms. So I'm Maria Tobon, I'm the project manager of MAPE. And today with me, Thierry Chambert, which is a postdoctoral researcher at the French National Center of Scientific Research. So first, I'm going to present you in a very general way, the program. And then Thierry is going to present you EolPop, which is a tool to quantify the impact of collisions on bird populations. So to start, a brief introduction to French context. Between 2017 and 2020, France plans to double its wind energy capacity. So this transition toward renewable energy, which is very positive for the country, if it's not correctly planned, as it has already been said, can have negative consequences on biodiversity. Here in France, we have 8,000 turbines in 1,942 wind farms. And so to regulate these negative consequences, it is mandatory in France to avoid, mitigate, and or offset for impacts in the environment. So concerning mitigation, two main solutions are currently used. The first one is the generic curtailment during sensitive periods, so breeding, migration, bad weather conditions, or the installation of automatic detection system, ADS, on or near operating turbines that emit acoustic deterrent signals or shut down the turbine. Since the installation of ADAs in some wind farms, questions have arisen concerning the state authorities, the NGOs, but also the wind farm operators regarding this ADS efficiency. And from this concern was born a MAPE, the program MAPE. So it began in 2018 when the Department of Ecology and the League for the Protection of Birds wondered about the effectiveness of these ADS systems and wanted to answer the question how to reduce avian mortality in terrestrial wind farms in connection especially with this ADS. So they proposed to elaborate a research project when in the MSH-Sud and its collaborative research facility, which is called Trait d'Union. The objective was to be accompanied by a neutral actor that can allow the different actors concerned by the problem to discuss together and to work together. So Trait d'Union made a link between the request and the research, turning to the center of the CEFE, the Center of Functional and Evolutive Ecology in Montpellier. And Trait d'Union also proposed the participation of all the actors concerned in a process of enlarged consultation. So once that the request was accepted, Trait d'Union assisted to the co-construction of the research project in defining the issues, the deliverables, the governance. And once the project was a little bit stabilized, we started searching for funding to carry out the implementation in 2020. Three main scientific goals were identified: understanding the causes and consequences of bird mortality in wind farms, production of knowledge to improve the efficiency of detection and avoidance systems, and the production of knowledge to improve the current regulation. So how did the MAPE program started? It had an incubation phase first that took place between 2018 and 2020. So it started with a launching seminar to present the approach, present the state of knowledge, gather expectations, and then a second seminar 1 year after to validate the topics of research, validate the project structure. And in between these two seminars and after the second seminar, we had also different preparatory meetings to formalize the governance of the project, write the pre-project, planning the process, and all these actions to carry out the implementation of the project. During this incubation phase, so the program structure was defined by all the stakeholders. The program is then divided in 3 parts: research part, protocol part, and consulting part. Each of these parts is also divided in 3 work packages, sorry. So the research part is divided in work package 1, which is the causes of bird mortality in wind farms. The number 2, consequences of collisions on bird populations. And the third one is concerning the information to improve avian mortality reduction solutions. The protocol part is the evaluation of automatic detection tools, which is divided in 2 parts. The first one is writing and validating the collaborative evaluation protocol. And then the second part, which consists in the implementation of this protocol in test sites. So for this, to carry out these 2 parts, the participation of different students was needed. The postdoctoral researchers, master students, and PhD students. And there's a third part of the project, which is the consultation part, which is really the coordination and the support for the consultation process. So it's a project manager during the 3 years of the project. We also defined during the incubation phase the governance of the project. This is very important. It's a little bit complex, but it really defines the collaborative interest of the project. And it's structured in 3 councils: the steering committee, which is a strategic management of the project. So it brings together the historical actors of the request, the founders, and the research. So 12 institutions, and the MSH-Sud, which is in charge of the animation and the coordination of the project. So to make sure that the process runs smoothly and that the principles of the approach are respected, of the collaborative approach. Then we have the technical committees. So for each work package, we have a technical committee. So in all, we have 48 representatives of 32 organizations. So this is not a making decision body, but it's the operational management body of the project. And we have a 3rd council, which is the multi-actor working group. So it's 96 entities. And this multi-actor working group allows all the participants of the project to contribute to the project actions. So they meet once a year. And then we start the implementation phase in 2020, a 3rd seminar in 2021. And in between, we have technical committees meetings to contribute to the technical part of each research. For 2023, we're going to have a 4th seminar and a 5th seminar to inform the research progress, and the 5th one to present the final results of the project. So today, what is the program progress? In purple, you have the work packages that are in progress. So the understanding the conditions that led to bird collisions, the better understand the perception of rotatory motion by birds, and the implementation of the collaborative evaluation protocol in test sites. In green, you have the work packages that are already finished: determine sustainable mortality threshold for bird populations, determine minimum detection distances for birds to avoid mortality, and writing and validating the collaborative evaluation protocol. And the work package 5, which is the coordination, that it's always in progress because we need to maintain the dialogue and the dynamic of the project. So to finish, some conclusion remarks. So by involving stakeholders at all steps of the program, MAPE has reached its goal of developing knowledge and tools that were collectively identified as highly needed, and especially to reconcile wind farming industry and biodiversity conservation. It's a very important project in France because it's the first research program of this kind. And it's also an example that shows that building collaborative research programs involving dozens of stakeholders from different perspectives is possible. But however, we really need time for this, and this process has to rely on a strong neutral facilitation structure that can help to solving problems, maintaining a permanent dialogue, and keep the dynamic of the program to be successful. Okay, so thank you very much. This is all for me.
Thank you very much, Ana Maria. And I will directly pass the floor to Thierry Chambert that will present the EolPop tool. Thank you.
Okay, I get a message saying that I cannot activate the screen share. Sounds like you deactivated it.
Can you try again?
Now it's good. Yeah, now it's good. Thank you. There was probably a delay. Up and okay. Can you say it fine?
We see your notes. So this is in presenter mode, but we only...
Oh, with the, yeah, I see. Hold on one sec. Okay, I need to do this.
Now it works. Yes.
Now it's good?
Yes.
All right. Let me get that out of the way. All right, so yeah, thank you for the invitation. And so because Anna Maria already presented the project, I'm going to directly dive into the presentation. So this is a collaboration with other colleague from the CNRS, where I work in France with so Mathilde Delot, Olivier Durier, and Aurélien Bénard. And so what I'm going to present is EolPop. So that's a tool that we developed to quantify the impact of collision on bird population. So it's a tool that does population modeling, but in a very simplified way. The idea was to have a tool that people that are not experts can easily use. Okay, so quickly the context. So we currently, when we think of impacts of wind energy on birds, we think in terms of individual fatalities, and usually like impact assessments mainly focus on that. But the goal of this project was to go one step beyond and to think in terms of consequences of those fatalities on the demography of a population. And obviously, when we make this transition from individual mortality to like population dynamics, we have to take into consideration that the consequences on the demography is going to depend not only on the number of fatalities, but also on the initial population size of the population, its initial trend, and also on the species characteristics such as survival, fecundity. And the tool we develop, what it does, it uses population projections, so using simulation to predict the trajectory of the population under two scenarios, one scenario without the wind farm fatality and one with the wind farm fatality. And in those simulation, we integrate a demographic model, which includes age classes, natural viability of the population, which we call stochasticity, and density dependence for growing populations. Behind this approach, obviously, it's a statistical approach. So we also integrate parameter uncertainty because usually the input parameters are not known perfectly. There is uncertainty around. And to quantify the impact at the end, what we do is we use a comparative approach, which is similar to the one described by Cook and Robinson in their 2017 paper. And this approach is interesting because it's less sensitive to uncertainties. And the idea is we are going to compare the population trajectory between two scenarios. One scenario without the wind farm fatalities, that would be the black line, and the blue line, which is the scenario with wind farm fatalities. So we take the relative impact after some time, usually 30 years. So the tool that we built on purpose, we made it fairly simple to use. So there are like 3 steps for the user to run an analysis. The first one is to choose which type of analysis they want to run. Either they want to analyze the impact of a single wind farm. They can also choose cumulative impacts to assess impact of several wind farms. And they can also investigate hypothetical scenarios of mortalities. Then they have to choose which species they want to analyze. And here we did like some work to already implement survival and fecundity values for like a list of 60 species, which are like the priority species in France for the MAPE project. So obviously abroad, it wouldn't be necessarily the same species. But in any case, we also left an option so people could enter their own value of survival and fecundity if they want to analyze another species. That's not in the list. And then the user has to provide the annual fatalities. So how many fatalities per year or what rate of fatalities, population size, growth rate of the population. So that's the trend of the population, whether it's growing, declining, or stable, and carrying capacity. That's the maximum population that the population can reach in its environment. And for all those scenarios, as I told you, we gave options to provide also uncertainty around parameters. And the uncertainty can be provided in 3 ways, either as an interval of values, so with the mean value and a max value, either an estimate and a standard error when it comes from like a real study with statistics. And finally, we can also use expert elicitation, and the program provides a table which we can fill with the value that we asked from expert. And we also provided a guide to how to do expert elicitation. Once the user has provided those, then it's pretty simple. It just tells how many years he wants to do the simulation for and how many simulation. It has to be a replication process, and then just run the analysis. And in the end, the user gets several outputs as results. First, we show two tables. One is the estimated relative impact at the given time horizon. So that's the example of the table in blue. And also the probability of extinction, again, at the time horizon. And that's the table in yellow. Okay, in addition to those tables, the program also provides several graphs. So the predicted trajectories over time with confidence interval, and the relative impact over time, which is the metric that is less sensitive to uncertainty, which should be used for the conclusions. All right, now I'm going to showcase the use of the tool with a small case study from southern France on the lesser kestrel. So this a small falcon that breeds in southern France. Sorry, there are only like 3 small populations in southern France, and one of them is being impacted by mortalities at a local wind farm. And since 2013 until 21, I don't have the 22 numbers, there has been like 54 fatalities observed on that species. So that's the number of carcasses that have been found. Okay. So to run the model, what we have to provide is those numbers. So the mortality rate, first what we did is we translated the number of carcasses found into how many real birds were probably killed using the estimates like GNEST, so using the bias correction. And then we translated those in annual mortality rate, which was estimated at 4.9% of the population being killed each year, with a standard error of 0.7%. Population size, we know it perfectly because that population is very closely followed, and it's 292 pairs as of 2021. The annual growth rate was estimated between 9 and 14% without collision. So the population has been growing since it established in the late 90s. And the carrying capacity, for that, we asked experts to give us their best estimates of how big they think that this population could grow locally. And they gave us an estimate between 1,000 and 5,000 pairs. So 2,000 to 10,000 breeding individuals. And when we plug those numbers and run the projections, those are the results we obtain. So again, the black line is the scenario without fatalities, so how the population would grow without impact from wind farms. And the blue line is once we included the impact from the wind farm. And also, first thing we can see is that even with the impact, the population is still expected to grow, and it has been growing still for the last 10 years since the wind farms were installed. But after 30 years, we see that compared to the baseline scenario, there would be a deficit of almost 3,000 birds, which we estimated as a relative impact of almost 50%. So this graph shows the relative impact over time. And as we can see, the relative impact grows as time goes, and then it stabilizes after around 20 years. And after 30 years, like the population deficit is around 50%. All right, I will just finish with a quick conclusion. So again, this tool is intended for people in charge of environmental impact assessments, so consulting firms, state authorities. The idea was to provide a tool that can easily used for people who do not have the skills to implement PVA on their own. We made this tool freely available. The next step for us should be to define, so using now that this tool is in place, it would be to define legal threshold of impacts to help the interpretation and the decision making. And that joins the presentation of Dr. Noam Leader earlier. In France, one of the big issues right now is that we do have the knowledge, we do have the tool in place, especially now with this tool, but the state authorities, they do not want yet to define threshold. And I think that's really an impairment to a good planning and decision making. So hopefully we're trying to push forward for using those tools and the information we have to define those thresholds. And also one of the next steps would be to facilitate access to data, because obviously to implement this tool and evaluate impact at the population level, the better data we have, the better results we'll have. Otherwise, we'll just have huge confidence interval, and it might not be that useful. And with that, I will thank all the partners and my colleagues, and I will leave it to that.
Thank you very much, Anna Maria and Thierry, for those fantastic presentations. We'll keep the questions for the discussion at the end. I'm going to share my screen again. Please let me know if you see it. Yeah. Yes, great. So we've heard experts talking about pre-planning, sensitivity mapping, research in collaboration projects. But this webinar wouldn't be complete without talking about the importance of post-installation mitigation measures. This is also a really important aspect, and I want to give you a brief overview of the work and the research that has been done and what has been proven efficient to reduce the risk on birds. So what is it exactly? Once the farm is built and a risk for birds is identified, what can we do to reduce this risk? What can we do to reduce mortality? So first of all, to evaluate the risk on bird populations in newly built wind farms, experts need to monitor the avifauna activity and mortality in the park. The experts have already mentioned this previously. This is done usually through a post-construction EIA, and this is essential to do it and can sometimes require a lot of time and effort because an avifauna expert needs to go in the field, and sometimes it takes a couple of days, a week to record bird mortality and activity. So some tools can help monitoring bird activity. For example, I don't know if you're aware of this, at RGI, we have what we call the Good Practice of the Year Award. And in 2020, the Royal Society for the Conservation of Nature in Jordan won the award for the environmental category through that project called Mainstreaming Soaring Bird Conservation in Energy Sectors. And they have developed a national database for bird monitoring in energy infrastructure in partnership with the Ministry of Environment. This to record and centralize any bird activity mortality found in wind farms or at the grid. And through this application that has been developed, the technicians on the ground, they can, as I said, record the bird activity, and it's directly linked to the national database. This really helps ensuring continuous development of the national guidelines, and it also helps to overcome the problem of lack of data, as we already mentioned in this webinar. Data availability is really a problem. So secondly, once the monitoring is done, so once the monitoring is done and the risk for birds is identified, the most effective measures known so far is the temporary shutdown of the most impactful turbines in the park, which means that their rotation is stopped at specific set times, as for example, days during the peaks of activity during migration periods, for example. I want to give you a practical case study on the Griffon vulture in Spain during 2006 and 2009. that showed that the shutdown of a small number of high impactful turbines have reduced mortality rate by 50%. This was achieved with a drop in energy production of only 0.0% each year, and on average, turbines were stopped for 6 hours and 20 minutes each year. So this is a great example that shutdown has a positive effect, can reduce mortality by half in this case, with only a slight loss in energy production. This is a win-win situation for nature and energy. I also want to mention that the tool, the existing tool to assist the shutdown. So for example, tools that have cameras directly at the turbine, they automatically detect birds, the level of collision risk, and through an algorithm, they calculate if a shutdown is needed. But it is important to remember that the effectiveness of those tools is yet to be proven. There are also additional mitigation strategies to reduce the collision risk for birds. Again, the effectiveness is still in discussion in the literature, but I want to mention them. For example, reduce the intensity of lights to avoid attraction of birds to the turbine, or increase the visibility of the turbines by painting some parts in black or with UV paint. And last, the use of deterrent devices to directly put at the turbine, and using cameras, they will detect birds, analyze the collision risk, and make if they analyze that the risk is too high, they will make a very loud acoustic sound. So sometimes it can be a bird of prey sound or a loud alarm sound to scare the birds away. We'll share the links of the research in the chat. To finish, I want to highlight that those technologies should never replace a good EIA, a good environmental impact assessment, and a good pre-construction planning. And site and species-specific approaches should always be adopted. This is very important to remember this. So this is it for my part for this quick overview, and I would like to pass the floor now to the key stakeholders that we have from the wind industry and civil society to give their reaction and provide their perspective. It wouldn't be fair if we didn't have the wind industry perspective. So first, we're gonna hear from Maxime Wadik, who is the strategic communication manager at Wind Europe, and he will give the European wind industry perspective. And we're gonna hear about Ariel Brunner, who is the senior head of policy at BirdLife Europe and Central Asia, and he will provide the NGO perspective. So Maxime, I pass the floor to you. Thank you.
Yes, do you hear me okay?
Yes, very good.
Perfect. So, hi everyone, good afternoon. So my name is Maxime and I'm a communications manager at Wind Europe. So Wind Europe, we are the trade association for wind energy in Europe. So I will start by thanking RGI and the Arava Institute for inviting us. I think this has been a very interesting webinar and very good discussion so far. We've seen the array of solutions. It's really good overview of all the solutions that are available to us to minimize the negative impacts of wind energy on bird population, but also on bats, as it had been mentioned. So, of course, I agree with, and this is very much aligned with the view of the industry, what you just ended your speech on, Manon, that the most important is planning and pre-planning. So all the work that is done before the installation of a wind turbine, that avoids most of the possibility of negative impacts after installation. So of course, environmental impact assessment is key. I think it was really nice to see examples of the sensitivity maps as well in the presentations. So these are great tools, part of many other tools that are used in this first phase. That is key, but definitely a very useful one. Then mitigation measures as well. Manon, thank you for mentioning them. So the post-installation mitigation measures also very important once the wind farm has been installed. So maybe just a few takeaways, since you asked me to give a quick reaction to all the information we've heard. I think the first thing is one size doesn't fit all. I think it's Iván who said that. So we realize from the different speakers, the different projects that, of course, a lot of it is very country specific. So is the particular example of Israel and the Golan Heights. So region specific, site specific as well. We had Noam reminding us that I think it was in Spain. In some cases, just a few wind farms can be responsible for most of the impact. And Manon, you also mentioned that in some instances, reducing or shutting down just a small number of turbines at very specific times can really limit or avoid most of the negative impact and mortality of birds without losing too much of the power. So that's really one thing, and one thing that probably makes it both difficult to draw generic practice, but at the same time that also gives us one more time an array of different possibilities, different solutions that can be really implemented at site level. I think the second takeaway is everyone seemed to be saying that we need more data, we need better data. That includes simulations. So I think that the MAPE project is a good example, good initiative of this. And this is very much something that is in progress and for the wind industry as well. And I think it also links to the availability and the technologies that are used, in particular in post-installations. So the technologies that you mentioned, Manon, all of this is very much in progress and it's still in the build-up phase. There is also questions of manufacturing scale. So being able to develop those technologies, to keep getting data, to make those technologies even better. And so there is, well, this is in progress. Everyone is looking forward to having even better results in the short future. And then finally, of course, collaboration. So Wind Europe, our members were taking part in various initiatives. I think this is really key. It's of course very key for the wind industry to minimize as much as possible the negative impacts on biodiversity. It really is a balance of climate and biodiversity. So that's back to the very first presentations from our colleagues at the Arava Institute. And I think this is really key. We're in this together and we will need to find solutions together because we can't do without one or another. They need to go hand in hand. And this is, I think, the last words from me.
Thank you very much, Maxime. Indeed, we need to work together and work hand to hand. That was a very interesting input and also very interesting to hear from the wind industry perspective. I would like to pass the floor now to Ariel Brunner to give the NGO perspective. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I think we've had a lot of interesting examples and studies and developments. And I think that what emerges is that on the fundamental principles, we probably all agree. The problem is, what do we do with those fundamental principles in practice and in the specific cases? And that's where it gets complicated. So on the principles, I think we are on the same page. We need to deal with the climate emergency and the biodiversity emergency at the same time. Dealing with the climate emergency means using a lot less energy, using it better, and producing it from renewables. And that does mean deploying a lot of renewable infrastructure and grid infrastructure, and storage, a bunch of other things, and those things will have impacts, and those impacts need to be managed and minimized, but we cannot hope for an impactless energy transition. So we do need to accept that there are trade-offs and that we need to try and get as much clean energy as we can for as little ecological damage as we can. So far, so good. I think we also all agree that the real crucial point is sound planning based on good sensitivity analysis, on data, on models, and so on. And there is a lot of tools that are being developed. BirdLife has been at the forefront of developing those tools, anything from the Avi-based tool that we've heard about to methodologies for sensitivity mapping and censuses, to active cooperations with the industry, with authorities, and so on. And the evidence is that when you put wind farms in the right places, you can massively reduce their impacts, but also that when you put them in the wrong places, it can be a mess. And then there is this new, rapidly evolving set of technologies around mitigating the impacts on location, cameras, radars, and so on. And also, it's not just the technological aspect, but also the methodological ones, shutdowns on demand, seasonal shutdowns, and so on. So far, so good. Where it's a bit more problematic is, first of all, in the commitment of the energy industry, the wind industry, to try and actually do the right things and not just say that it does the right things. And on that, I must take issue with the colleagues from Wind Europe, because at the moment, for example, in the EU, they are pushing very aggressively at the regulation agenda that is trying to basically chop to pieces the environmental safeguards that we have in European legislation. And that's not going to lead us to good projects done properly. It's going to lead us to a lot of conflict and a lot of mess and a lot of delays and bad image for the industry and ecological damages. So, you know, we are trying to work together, but we need to be constructive on both sides. The other issue is when you look at the local situation. And there, I think Yoav has explained quite well why Israel is a bit of an outlier. So while in most countries, once you do the sensitivity analysis and the good planning, you can easily find safe locations. And you can also find problematic bottlenecks. And then you can always have a discussion about exactly where do you draw the line. Israel is a bottleneck, and you know, if you were to do a sensitivity map on the Western Palearctic, probably Israel would be the one bright red area where you really don't want to go. Now, obviously, the politics and the jurisdictions are such that you know, those exercises are done at national level, and there I think that there is a very valid debate to be had about whether in a country like Israel, which is de facto entirely a bird bottleneck and a bat bottleneck, while it has a huge and at the moment essentially untapped solar potential, whether it's actually one of those countries where you wouldn't want to really throw the sink at solar rather than at wind. Again, it is good to look at the numbers, and the numbers are that you get more birds flying over Israel in a good day than fly on some European countries in a year. So that's something that we need to deal with. And I would just close on the issue that all those technologies that help us mitigate the impacts should really be implemented in the good locations and not be used to try and run projects into the wrong locations. They should progressively become the standard so that we do the planning, we put wind in the lower risk situations, and in those lower risk situations, we use the best possible technology to really limit the damage. I'm really afraid that if the industry insists on trying to go into high risk locations and to use technologies that are not mature, not ready, experimental as an excuse for going into high risk locations, what we are going to get is a lot of very bad damage, and that very bad damage will reflect very badly on the industry. It will be manipulated by those very powerful and very nasty forces out there that want to stop the energy transition. And at the end of the day, everybody will be a loser: biodiversity, the climate, and the wind industry itself. So I would really beg people to think very, very carefully about what they do and where they do, and to work constructively on finding safe locations rather than trying to win the argument at all costs on the wrong locations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ariel. That was super interesting and very, very important to have your perspective on that. So now we're done with the webinar. I would like to take the advantage of a moderator to ask my first question. And this will go to all the speakers here. So my question is, we know now that there is valuable biodiversity and that needs to be protected in some areas. So how can we make sure that the tools that you have presented are effectively used by the different actors? So if one of you wants to go first, please unmute and you can answer my question.
I can start if you want, Manon. Is that okay? Now,
Yes,
very
please.
quickly. Well, this is of course the critical question, but what I would say is that basically what we are seeing is that it's all about communication, but then also about resources. I mean, structures such as the ETF, but also other models, coalitions by NGOs and others are doing their best in terms of sharing the available information and available tools. But there is a moment where you need additional resources to either facilitate the arrival of those technologies at national level or to train the officials and the technical people to know how to use them. This is usually when the situation gets blocked. You either do not have a well-designed project that includes capacity building for the officials and the technical people responsible for implementing the next steps, or they simply weren't aware of the tools, or the tool was not available for them. As we saw, for example, for some of them, like MSB or Avistep, this is far from being a global tool, So it's important to insist again on resources and the fact that, governments, finance institutions, but everybody, society really needs to demand that the resources are there to gather the information and to use the information with these tools before the construction takes place.
Thank you, Iván. Is there anyone else that wants to complete? Yes, Yoav, please go ahead.
Just to continue on what Iván said, I think it's really important to stress the importance of transferability, sincerity with the parties, the stakeholders dealing with how to deal with these dilemmas, for instance, like Ariel talked. And I'm afraid that, for instance, in the Israeli case study, some decisions were made without sincerity, without transferability. And I think that's a big challenge, at least in Israel. Some of these decisions are made according to political reasons, not even economical reasons. and that's a big, big obstacle. Of course, Israel is a special case study. Not only the birds here are special, but also the politics are a bit crazy. So it's sometimes quite complicated, and the pressures are huge. But I think it's really, really important to have responsible governments, responsible regulators that can do their job in regulating these processes.
Thank you. Noam, you raised your hand. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to add that at least in Israel, I think, and also in other countries, developers today in this kind of private economic world where private developers are usually three steps at least ahead of the governments. So when they come with this initiative, still governments do not know what to do. This is exactly what happened in Israel. So by the time we made these sensitivity maps, all the locations were already established. So it was just, just to do a vid, and we did a sensitivity map. And I think there are two tools. I think that Alvaro Camina, I think, is maybe listening. I know he was involved in the project in Tafila in Jordan with the World Bank. And once you have the financiers are banks, are Western world banks that are thinking about green economy and environmental issues, they would not support projects that are bound to create problems to biodiversity. This is one tool. If you don't have this capability of having money talk, then you are sometimes forced to use the regulation. So what we did in Israel is we convinced the National Planning Commission to get our ideas, to get them as regulations. One of our main demands was to have the developers they're required to have a permit, a take permit. A take meaning that you are allowed to kill birds. Okay, you need to have a permit from a regulatory authority, the INPA. This is something that Israel is not used to. And so there are a lot of arguments. I can tell you a lot. We spent many hours in courts trying to enforce our ideas, although they were accepted by regulation. So it's either, and I'm in the ETF as well. I know everybody's thinking, let's hold hands and do the right thing. It's very nice. Okay, in the practical world, that not necessarily works. So you need to think, what is your carrot and where is your stick, as the saying goes.
Thank you, Noam. Is there anybody from the experts that wants to complete this? If not, I will go to some questions in the chat. We had a question from Mikhail Magradi. If you're still here and you want to unmute and ask your question. Maybe not. Then we also have a question from Luigi Carta. I don't know if Luigi, if you're still here and you want to unmute and ask your questions yourself, or I can do it. Okay. Maybe those people are already gone. Then I will go through the next question.
Sorry. Maybe. Do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Sorry, I met just specialist here that was asking me questions, so I didn't follow the meeting, the last part, so sorry for that. You want to ask me any questions?
You asked a question in the chat, so
yes, I was asking a few questions about. Let me check, because I was doing so many things in the meantime. Yes, I was wondering, and then I saw some slides about the percentage of, like in Israel, the main corridor for the birds, and just to have an idea, I'm just wondering about, because we know there are so many birds that are killed from the cars, for the buildings, just to have an idea in percentage ratio of the birds killed by the wind turbines, and if we know also if those are small wind turbines, big wind turbines? I don't know, something like that, just to have an idea. I don't know if someone can answer this question. I work in a company that develops and create and of course produces wind energy from the wind. And it's a topic very important to me since I like very much the environment and all the sustainability and those kind of things. So just for me to have an idea.
So anyone from our speakers want to answer this? So your question is regarding the size of the turbines, right?
My question is, we know that, I don't know, I've seen some that say that we have like a 0.1 fatalities per wind turbine, so wind fatalities per wind turbines per year. So, but to what kind of wind turbines are we related? I mean, are we related like, I don't know, 50 meters up high wind turbines generator, or I don't know, 100 meters, because it depends, because the bigger they are, the slower the rotor, the blades will move. So there are different aspects that I would like to understand. So since we promote the wind parks, wind farms, and the wind project development for here some region in Italy, so those aspects are actually really important to me. I mean, both personally, then in a professional way, of course.
Okay, thank you for your question. Noam, you raised your hand. You want to answer this?
Yeah, so I think you asked a few questions. I think they're more on the scope of the kind of the philosophical side, but I want to address the thing about the statistics. Okay, the statistics. You know how many cats, how many birds are killed by cats. It's not relevant in the middle of the Golan Heights because griffon vultures are not eaten by cats. Okay, they are eaten by, hopefully not, but maybe by wind turbines. The number of birds killed by lights, and I do a lot of work on light pollution, is immense. It doesn't matter. We should talk about light pollution as an issue, not, what if, what. It's kind of a demagogic, I'm sorry, argument. I can't do anything with it. I need, when we wake up in the morning as regulators, we need to take care about wind turbines, about solar plants that have electrical transmission lines that are much more than we had before. So you have collisions as well, and you have suddenly tall buildings, and you have suddenly light pollution. You have many, many things. It's not, okay, let's not deal with wind turbines because more birds are killed by tall buildings. Okay. Now,
yeah, I understand, but it's not what I meant, of course.
So you need to be clear, but this is what I understand. So let me just finish.
I'm trying to be clear. I'll try to be clear. I will tell it again, but I just want to have a percentage, an idea. It doesn't mean that we don't have to talk about it. It's not my approach in life or in whatever it is. It can be birds or whatever is the topic. I just want to have an idea on what kind of percentage, like for this specific breed or this related to the height of their flight. Then I'm not a professional of birds or this kind of topics. It was just to go a deepening that I would like to have. For me, for you, maybe it's just something that all of you know, but for me, it's something not that in my professional career. I follow other kind of things, but I'm also curious and I would like to know just also to prevent those fatalities and to have an idea of what kind of issue. Of course, it's an issue. I'm not saying that it's not. I would like just to have.
Okay, so today, 10 years ago when we started working on it, 7 years ago, we didn't have a lot of data. Today, there are a lot of works. There's a very good group, the British Trust of Ornithology. They published a nice paper about the collisions with turbines for all kinds of birds and bat species, and they have a very good statistics. So you can see, the proportion. They also looked at size of wind turbines. They also looked at different climates. So today, when there's more data, you can do a lot of playing around with the big numbers. Okay, and you can try to. The thing is that unfortunately, many people do not go into the numbers and the details, and they end up, you know, talking about, okay, well, how many birds are killed by climate change. So I think that a climate change scientist should maybe sit one day and do the model and show us, because there's no real good data. I'm sorry that I'm doing a good work on what I'm responsible for, but I'm looking at the bird data, Thierry as well, and he's coming with answers, Yoav as well, but we don't see all the other comparisons, except for use by, I'm sorry, but I think it's illegitimate use by people who have a hidden agenda, okay, in many cases, okay? So the data is out there. I'm sure you can find it very easy to get a perspective. And in a place like Israel, it's totally not negligible. I mean, it's not something we
yes, I understand. Thank you for your commitment and really appreciate that. It's also very important to me. I mean, I am a big lover of environment, I really do. So for me, just to know the curiosity to know this part, and still I would like to have an idea at least. So if it's the same, I don't know, the percentage of the number of fatalities or related, I don't know, with small wind turbines, like 30 meters high, 40, 60 meters, it's the same, it doesn't count, because of course, at least I know that small wind turbines, like the blades, move very quick, pretty quick, while the bigger they are, the slower the blades moves, so it can be is it a problem, or let's say it's the same? I don't know. I'm just asking.
It's not slow enough. It's not slow enough. But
I'm going to pass the floor to Thierry. You raised your hand. Maybe you want to complete this. Thank you.
Yes, I was just wanting to provide maybe some information. I don't have the numbers in mind about, you know, what sizes, statistics of collisions with size and stuff like that. But the big principles are bigger turbines, obviously, because they have a larger swept area, they tend to kill more birds. But when you think of it in terms of how many birds would be killed per megawatt produced, I think some studies have shown that it might be more interesting to have less turbines of a larger size than more turbines of smaller size. And one factor that's really important, it's the clearance to the ground. So the distance from the ground to the lowest part of the blade. The lower this is, the more impact it has, especially on bats, I think. But I think it's also true on birds. And to get those information in a more precise way with statistics, a good place to start is the paper that Noam Leader just mentioned, and I just put the link in the discussion, so you can click the link, and that's the paper by the British people who did a big review, and that's a good place to start, because I think there are probably more studies on that. So if you want more precise.
Okay, yeah, very kind, and thank you for your information, for what you said. And I was just wondering about the part where you said the bigger they are, of course the area is bigger, but also the bigger they are, the slower they move. So is it the same for the wind? I mean, the velocity, how...
So, okay, about velocity, when you say the slower, do you mean like rotation per minute?
Yes,
because then you have to think for a bird, it's not rotation, it's not the speed in terms of rotation per minute, but it's the linear speed at the end of the blade that matters. So my understanding,
somehow they are related at least.
So, and I'm not a specialist on that, but is, you know, even a fairly low rotation per minute, at the end of the blade, you can get like pretty high speed, which still kill the birds. That's my
I understand, but we are talking about like a physics concept. Let's see what happens in real life. I mean, I'm still asking this question, just a question. So if I have a small wind turbine...
I'm sorry to interrupt you. We have to move forward, and we're going to go to another questions. I think the speakers answered you, and if not, you can read the paper that has been shared. I see one hand, Roland Léchy from RGI. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Manon. Thank you, everyone, for your very interesting presentations and comments for what's going on in this thing. I'd like to address a question that I think it's relevant for the MAPE project, and I think the EolPop tool. And you mentioned at the end, Thierry, how this tool is relevant for state authorities working in this field. What are you actually doing to sort of disseminate and promote your project and this kind of tool among authorities to be much more considered, for example, in the projects that are being implemented or the one to come? Thank you.
So what we're doing is, so first of all, because this tool was developed inside the MAPE project, and as Anna Maria explained, the MAPE project gathers all the stakeholder from its start, like all the people, all the stakeholder, they know about it because they kind of follow the project all along, and that includes state authorities. So that's to start with. That's the largest way of communication about this tool. The second way of communication is us, the few researchers who developed the tool. We do work, I mean, with the Ministry of Environment in France, which is in charge of those questions. So both from the climate side and from the biodiversity side. And we have presented this tool. We did like some workshop and some official presentation where like the ministry was present and also more the regional state authorities. So that's how we communicate. But that being said, as of today, we have not really been heard in terms of, okay, now we need to define threshold and we need to make that work of how do we define threshold now that the tool are in place. So I'm talking about the mortality thresholds. So we communicate, but it doesn't mean all our messages are being heard, I guess.
Thank you, Thierry. Liam, your hand is raised. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks again from my side to everyone. Really insightful presentations. I guess my question actually builds on one of my colleague Roland and what Thierry just said. Again and again, it seems like there's fantastic approaches out there. We have the solutions that we need, but the stumbling blocks come to implementation. So a question to everyone, but I guess focusing on Iván, the work of CMS, and Thierry and Anna Maria, how can we go that extra step to make sure that we really get commitment? What is the missing puzzle pieces to make sure that the authorities, the policy, the governments implement these really innovative and practical tools?
So who wants to go first? Maybe Iván?
The extra mile. I like the approach. Well, I don't have a magical solution. What I would say is that, as I said in the presentation, really, my experience, our experience working with parties is that they are very receptive. Actually, they are quite open to receiving as much information before investment takes place. Of course, there's a gradient here. Some countries are more open than others. Of course, I could be biased, but those that are members of the ETF. But generally speaking, I would say that engagement from countries is a bilateral, is a bidirectional, let's say, relationship. So whenever we from the CMS are reaching out to them with time in advance, I mean, I give you the example, for example, of Latin America, where some countries may not be that aware about the impacts of renewable energy. Whenever we approach them and we offer, like we did in the past 2 months, a specific webinar on the impacts of renewable energy and the challenges, they are really, really open to receiving more information, and they're really, really open to working together with investment agencies and with NGO sector. So, for us, it's really a matter of reaching in advance and providing the information. And my experience is that they are ready to commit. Then the second part of the story is, of course, as I mentioned before, is really the resources. I mean, you come to a situation where a country may be really willing to actually work on an issue, but they don't have the technical capacity or the financial resources to dedicate enough for example, biodiversity monitoring. And if they haven't built that well in advance, yes, sometimes you will get an investor given a relatively small amount of time to decide for them to take a decision, and this is where the mistakes could happen. So providing information and providing resources so the biodiversity data is available in advance and using the tools that some of the colleagues have been showing here is really fundamental, really, really fundamental.
Thank you, Iván. Thierry, if you want to complete this. We have 1 minute left.
Yeah, I mean, not much more to add. I think the main, it really depends on the political will, and I guess that's something we do not control. And in France, my experience is, yes, the state authorities are very receptive on a bunch of things we present, we develop. But on the other hand, it's the transition between, you know, assessing things from a scientific point of view, or and then making decision. Is that transition was hard. It's like when it's time to say, okay, you know, we've quantified this, where do we put the cutoff, saying, oh, it's too much, or it's fine, or it's that. And that's, I think it's more like a psychological issue to some extent, or it has more to do with sociology or psychology or cognitive science than you know, biology. So yeah, that's all I can say.
Thank you, Thierry. Unfortunately, we have no time for further questions. I would love to continue and speak about this for hours, but we have to end the webinar now. I would like to thank all the speakers for the great presentations that you provided. We shared all the links in the chat, but if any from the participants you want to know more about their project or their work, you can obviously email me or RGI, and then we will provide the info. Thank you for all the participants for coming and for the great discussion. I want to inform you that we will continue the Energy and Nature webinar series throughout next year, including one webinar on the combination of solar power and ecosystem restoration. So if you're interested to join, we will share the information on our website. And if you're interested to know more about RGI work, you can subscribe to the newsletters that will be shared in the chat in a couple of seconds. So once again, thank you very much for being here and participating in this great discussion. This really bird protection around wind farms is really an interesting topic, and it was important to address it. So thank you and have a nice end of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you for the invitation. Bye-bye for Honduras. Yeah.
Bye.